I want to thank you for joining us today as we continue our study series. I'm Pastor Jerry Burney, and in today's study on Genesis, we will be focusing on the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and especially on the two creation accounts, Eden and the seventh day. Understanding that there are actually two different creation accounts, Eden and the seventh day, and that they are both true, that God purposely gave these to Moses, will help us to understand sin, the source of evil, and our need for a Savior. When evolution came along in the 1800s, the church determined that any gap in the Bible's creation narrative, such as that between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, the very next verse, that could lead some people to accept evolution. And so the church denied any gap actually existed. The church is correct. There is no gap for evolution. Now, I deal with the evolution debate in detail in our study series in the book Science, Origins, and Ancient Civilizations. So if you want to get that, you can go through our ministry or just go to Amazon or something. However, the church is incorrect in its attempt to blend Eden and the seven-day accounts into a single creation event. In the past, when the church was wrong, Galileo challenged the church. Galileo did not challenge the Bible. The Bible has always been correct. 500 years ago, Luther challenged the church. Luther did not challenge the Bible. The Bible has always been correct. Today, I am challenging the church. The Bible is correct. This is a very detailed study in which we will discover that biblically these two creation accounts cannot be combined, and yet that is exactly what modern Christianity has tried to do. By not being biblically accurate, we have misunderstood a variety of things in the Bible which affect our relationship with God. Our ministry also has a study series on Revelation and end times, and our ministry delivers God's truth to jail and prison inmates all across the United States. If you would like us to mail weekly studies to someone in jail or prison, just email us with their name, their ID number, and address, and you can contact us through burneyfam.com. We left off last time talking about the conflict between the two creation accounts and the conflict between Eden and the seven-day account and light. I just want to review real quickly where we've been, real quick. We started off by talking about Genesis 1:1. In the beginning was the heavens and the earth, and it's plural. It's the third heaven, as Paul described. And then we talked about Genesis, whether it's flawed, whether it's just poetry, or is it truly history? And we've discovered that all scholars agree it is historical narrative. And then we talked about early in life what some of our attitudes and ideas might be about things in the Bible. And what we discovered was that we all have different ideas about science and evolution, about Noah and the flood, whether he killed babies, whether abortion's okay or not, whether God makes mistakes when he said he was sorry, about the Trinity, whether Jesus is actually God, if he's the only way, whether other religions have a way to heaven or not. We talked about our attitudes about babies being innocent, and of course the last thing on our list was the two creation accounts, which we're discovering that if we understand the two creation accounts, we can resolve a lot of these things. We can use archaeology, we can use science, we can use correct Bible understanding, but really the two creation accounts, understanding those, will clear up most of the conflicts that we have in Christianity. Then we went through talking about what some of the differences in the two creation accounts are. First, we talked about the names of God being different. Eden account and the seven-day account use different names for God. Then we talked about the words create and made. The Eden account uses the word bara, means create, original creation, and the seven-day account uses mostly the word asa, which means create out of already existing material. And we discussed man and plants, which came first. In the Eden account, man comes first, and in the seven-day account, plants come first. Obviously, a different meaning. In the Eden account, man is created, then the plants and animals, and then along comes woman later. And in the seven-day account, men and women are created at the same time. Even uses the word he created them. And then we talked about man's purpose. What's the difference in man's purpose between the two accounts? In the Eden account, man is to tend the garden. He's to fellowship with God, walk in the garden, enjoy picking the fruit and eating things and just being a gardener. But in the seventh-day account, we find out that man is supposed to subdue the earth, supposed to have lots of babies. Completely different purposes are described there. Then we're discussing light, and that's where we are right now. We discussed in Eden there are no verses about the origin, existence of light. Why is that? And we looked in Revelation 21. Let's go over there. Revelation 21, verse 23, and 22, verse 5. Eden is kind of like the new heaven and new earth. Eden is a supernatural creation. Adam and Eve were to live eternally in Eden. There was to be no death and dying unless sin crept in, which it did, and then sin brought death. But in God's concept of Eden is just like the new heaven and new earth. What's the new heaven and new earth like when it comes to the concept of light? In Revelation 21, verse 23, it says, the city in the New Jerusalem there in the new heaven and new earth, the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. Jesus is the light. God is the light. And verse 22, verse 5, in Revelation it says, and there will no longer be any night, and they will not have a need of the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, because the Lord God will illuminate them, and they will reign forever and ever. So it's very obvious that Eden and the new heaven and new earth are related in that God is our source of light. Reading from our book that we're using here, it says, in Eden no sun is mentioned. Note that the original creation is just like the new heaven and earth in Revelation 21, where there is no light. There is no sun or moon to give light. God is light. The sun, moon, and stars are created in the beginning. In Revelation 12, we're going to find out the sun, moon, and stars are there, and they are remade on the seven-day creation to give light. In other words, God even uses the word remake in the seven-day narrative to indicate that the sun, moon, and stars are there, but they're not giving the light we need to live. God is giving the light. So let's look at day one. Let's read first in Genesis 1 about day one when God brings light. Genesis 1, verse 3 to 5. This is a seven-day narrative. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now you'll notice that the sun, moon, and stars aren't created until day 4. So who's the light? God's the light. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and morning one day. So that's what God describes in the seven-day account about light. Let's take a look here in what I wrote about this light that God gives for day one. Genesis 1, 3 through 5. Day 1. Time as we now know it begins with the renewal of earth for the age of redemption. Light is truth and wisdom. Only light is good. Jewish rabbis interpret light to mean the Messiah, the Savior for this age, the Messiah they're looking for. The first couple of days, day 1 and 2 in the seven-day narrative, the first couple of days are mainly spiritual, not material. Wisdom comes before anything else. Proverbs 8:22. This was the view of the early church. On day 1, God defines wisdom, truth, and deception. Here in the very first few verses, we talk about darkness or the lack of truth and wisdom. We talk about day, those of the day, the light and the truth. We talk about night, those of the night, darkness and deception. You'll notice that it's divided. Souls from souls. Truth is divided from deception. Good from bad. Righteous from unrighteous. Light is not a visible wavelength. The sun, moon, and stars are not visible until day 4. God is our light, just like in the new heaven and new earth. Note in verses 3 and 4 that God divided the light, whereas in verse 18 it is going to be matter, the sun, moon, and stars, that are going to divide the light. Two different lights God is describing here. Evening and morning are mentioned in these verses. Evening and morning, moving from imperfection to perfection, from disharmony to harmony, from darkness to light, truth, and wisdom. The Hebrew root words are different from the modern conventional understanding. In the Hebrew, evening, E-R-E-V, it means decay, disorder, chaos, increasing entropy. Whereas morning in the Hebrew, which is bokar, B-O-K-E-R, means order and decreased entropy. The first day is a 24-hour period, as indicated by the phrase evening and morning. There's two things that we need to understand about a 24-hour day in Scripture. Day can mean anything. It can mean a period of time. It can mean a half a day during the light instead of the darkness. It can mean a 24-hour day. It can mean a variety of things. But God here is very specific. He tells us that evening and morning are the first day. So he numbers them and he gives us the words evening and morning. So the first day is a 24-hour period, as indicated by the phrase evening and morning. In other words, he qualifies it. It's not a 1,000-year day as in 2 Peter. And even though the sun and moon were not made until day 4, or actually remade, notice he uses the word made, remade, not create, the Hebrew references to a 24-hour period. Whenever a day is modified by a number, it can only mean 24-hour days. There are no exceptions. And spiritual meaning. Now, we can also look at Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, where there God also brings us into an understanding these are 24-hour days, because Exodus 20 and the Ten Commandments rely on a 24-hour day of creation. Now, the spiritual meaning means that wisdom comes before the material. Wisdom comes before the material. In other words, the very first thing, light, wisdom, comes before the actual material, the earth itself being formed. Day 1 could be the expansion event of energy into matter, some call the Big Bang. The universe does a Bolshevik expansion in less than 1 second, according to science. The earth is formless here until a day 3, and not the original creation. In other words, at this point, the earth is still formless. And yet God tells us in verse 2, Genesis 1, verse 2, that when he says the earth is formless, and then here in verse 3 we see it is formless, God tells us in Isaiah 45:18 that he did not create it formless. This means that the 7-day creation must follow the Eden account, because in the Eden account, the earth is formed. It's there. Okay, so this is one of the differences we can understand between these two accounts, Eden and the 7th day, that light is obviously different. Light was available in Eden, but God was the source, just as the new heaven and new earth is going to be, a return to paradise, a return to Eden. Whereas in this age, in the 7-day accounts, light was first God, and then he allowed the sun, moon, and stars to bring forth their light in day 4, and that's what we have today for our source of light. Okay, we're going to go on to the next item, which is the sun, moon, and stars, and talk about the differences in these two accounts between the sun, moon, and stars. Now in Eden, like I said, there's no mention of the sun, moon, and stars, but if we look at Revelation 12:1, let's flip over to Revelation 12:1, we can see that in the very beginning, the sun, moon, and stars were there. Revelation 12 is one of those chapters in Revelation where John, the author of Revelation, he describes for us things from the very beginning of Revelation to the very end. One of the difficult things about Revelation is it's not in sequence. There's not an order of sequence to the book. And that's in our study on Revelation and End Times. We actually have, we approach it in our book on Revelation and End Times. I approach it from a verse-by-verse standpoint. And then in our book of chronologies, I approach it from, it's one of the chronologies in here, is lots of different chronologies, but one of the chronologies in here is an actual scenario of how the end times unfolds. Two different things. So if you try to go chapter by chapter, verse by verse through Revelation, you can't find a sequence, a scenario for how things unfold. John writes down the revelations as he's given them. He writes the visions down as he receives them from God. And here in chapter 12 of Revelation, John receives a vision of things from the very beginning of creation all the way to the very end. This is an overview of everything in one chapter, so it jumps around pretty fast. In John chapter 12, verse 1, there was a great sign that appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So here we see mentioned already. The woman, of course, there's different interpretations of the woman. Some people see it as the Catholic Church. Israel sees it as the Jewish people. The woman represents actually all of the host of creation that are betrothed to God. Now, they're not married yet. They're betrothed. They're engaged. So all the hosts of heaven have been created in the beginning, along with the sun, moon, and stars. And we see here descriptions of the sun, and moon, and stars, all there. And all the hosts of heaven are there. So we know from the very beginning the sun, moon, and stars are there. Now, that's not the light that we see in Eden. God is the light we see in Eden. So, either the sun, moon, and stars at that point in the very beginning didn't have a wavelength that we recognize as light today, or God's light overpowered it and we only saw God's light. Maybe the sun, moon, and stars were in the background and we couldn't observe them. But Eden does not describe the sun, moon, and stars. It only describes God's light. Now, on the 7-day account, we can read in Genesis chapter 1, in the 7-day account, and we're going to go to verses 14 through 19 about the sun, moon, and stars in the 7-day account. And we want to note that the word used here is made, which means it's the word asa, which is remade out of existing material. In other words, the sun, moon, and stars are there, but God's going to remake them now for this 7-day, this flesh age that we live in. Genesis 1, 14 through 19. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. So he makes the sun and the moon as well as the stars. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. So this, in the 7-day creation, God actually brings us light from these objects, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Up until day 4, it was God himself providing the light to grow plants and such. So let's take a look at my description here of this. If I can get the page to turn here. It's Genesis 1, verse 14 through 19 that we just read. Now the creation becomes mainly material, not supernatural. So in other words, for the first 3 days, it was mostly supernatural. Obviously, if God was providing the light for plants, it was supernatural. Now the creation becomes mainly material, not supernatural. In this verses, it refers to actual visible light, just as we see today. Light is changed. Note the Hebrew word for original creation of 1:1, visible light for this age as opposed to another form of light or wavelength. Science knows most light from the sun and stars is not visible wavelengths. I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with the fact that there's a broad spectrum of radiation coming from the sun and stars, and only a small portion of it is a visible spectrum of light. But there's lots of other forms of radiation out there. Note here that matter, sun, moon, and stars divided the light. Sun, moon, and stars divided the light, whereas on day 1 it was God that divided the light. A different light. If this were interpreted as part of the Big Bang event, then as the universe expands, the frequency of energy stretches and the wavelengths eventually match the visible light spectrum, which is also being emitted from the matter that is forming in the sun and stars. In other words, what this is saying is that the matter at the Big Bang, if you're going to follow the Big Bang example, the Big Bang would have put out a lot of energy. According to Einstein's theory, energy can convert to matter, and this matter and energy is at a certain wavelength, but as it stretches out, it becomes, the wavelengths begin to change, and eventually we arrive at the wavelength we see, that small wavelength of light that we get from the sun, moon, and stars today. The Hebrew word for made the sun, moon, and stars is asah, remade. This is not an original creation. Remade from the original creation to suit the needs of a temporary age of reconciliation and redemption. This earth is falling apart. This universe is falling apart. Everything about us is falling apart. We're all dying. I'm dying. The solar system is dying. The universe is dying. This is not the creation that God originally made. He created things perfect in Eden to be eternal. This age is for the age of reconciliation, redemption. It's a temporary period of time. There is going to come a time when all those to be redeemed have been redeemed, and then God will bring an end to it all. Actually, the sun, moon, and stars were created in the beginning, Revelation 12, as we saw, and they now become visible during the 7-day recreation event. They are remade. The Hebrew writers did not use the words for sun, moon, or stars. You notice they meant the object of light, the object of the day, the object of the night, to separate the day from the night. They didn't use the words sun and moon here. And the reason for this is because these words in the Hebrew are also the names of the Babylonian gods. And they did not want to use Babylonian gods' names in their holy word. So you will not find the names sun, moon, and stars in the Hebrew. The Semitic and Canaanite languages all referred to these names. And they're all the same. And the Bible writers would not use the names of the false gods in their sacred text. So we can see that in addition to light being different, the sun, moon, and stars are different between the two creation accounts. We're beginning to see that through all these different things, let's go back here, it's not just one thing. We have the names of God are different. We see that not only the names of God, but the words used in these two creation accounts are different, create and made. We've seen that plants and man are different in these two accounts, the difference between plants and man. We see that man's purpose is different in these two accounts. We see that light is different in these two accounts, and we've just discussed that the sun, moon, and stars are different in these two accounts. God is trying to drive a point home that these two accounts are, in fact, very different from one another. Well, let's take another one. Let's keep going. How about the sea? Can we look at these two creation accounts and take a look at the sea and see that there's a difference between Eden and the 7th day? Now, I wish I could go to the Eden account and tell you about the sea, but you see in Eden, no sea is mentioned. It's kind of like the sun, moon, and stars not being mentioned in the Eden account. Why were the sun, moon, and stars not mentioned? Because God is light. And we saw that by looking at the new heaven and new earth. Well, it's the same thing with the sea. We can go over to the new heaven and new earth, and we see that there is no sea in the new heaven and new earth. My wife loves seafood, and unfortunately, fortunately for me, I don't care for seafood that much. But like I tell her, well, you better load up on the seafood while you can, because it's going to be gone in the new heaven and new earth. Let's look at Revelation 21, verse 1. Revelation 21, verse 1. The new heaven and the new earth, a description. It says, John says, Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. It's a picture of Eden. God is light. There is no sea. The things that we see around us today are this temporary, imperfect creation to bring us into back into a reconciliation with God, because we have fallen. But in the Eden account, there's no sun, no moon, no stars, no sea. God is light, and we have no sea. You also notice in the Eden account, no water life is mentioned. There's no sea, there's no water life mentioned. Now, it doesn't mean there's not rivers and lakes. It just means that there's no sea. So let's take a look at day 5 in the Bible, at the 7-day account. Let's see what it says about these things. And day 5 is mentioned in Genesis 1, verses 9 through 13. Genesis 1, 9 through 13. And God said, Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. Notice he didn't say it was good. He said it was so. It was so. Had to be that way, in other words. God called the dry land earth, and gathered the waters together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them, and it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants seed after their kind, trees bearing fruit seed after them, after their kind, and God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. So on the third day, God brought the sea into existence. Now how about water life? Let's go to verses 20 through 23. Verses 20 through 23. So on day 3 brings in the sea, and then it says, verse 20, Then God said, Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, let birds fly above the earth and in the open expanse of the heavens. God created the great sea monsters. And by the sea monsters in the Bible is actually the word for dragons. They did not have a word for dinosaurs when the Bible was written. Dinosaurs came about in the 1800s. In the Bible, the words used that might relate to dinosaurs are monsters and dragons, as we have here. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Verse 22, God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful, multiply, fill the waters in the seas, let the birds multiply on the earth. There was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. So on the third day, the seas were brought into existence. On the fifth day, sea life was brought into existence. I'll just read here from the book for a second about this very subject. If I get the right page. I'm talking about Genesis 1, 20 to 23, day 5. The usage of the word creation here is a Hebrew word for original creation, bara. Note that water life and flying fowl were not created in the period of the original creation of Genesis 1:1, which is further described in Genesis 2:19, or Eden. Original creation, Eden, paradise, is like the new heaven and new earth, which is also paradise and has no sea. Therefore, these are a new creation for this flesh age in which we live in now. The word whales used in the King James is a Hebrew word for monster or dragon. This is actually the first reference to dinosaurs in the Bible. The word whales is the Hebrew word Tanniym, which means a hideous, huge, elongated monster or dragon. This Hebrew word is sometimes translated as jackal due to its hideous appearance. The word dinosaur did not enter the vocabulary until the mid-1800s, obviously a long time after the Bible. Well, I want to thank you today for joining us in this series, and may God bless you each and every day. And until next time, please pray for our jail and prison ministry, BernieFam.com, and visit us, and send us the name and address of anybody you might like us to share weekly studies with.